Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Astrox Imperium tutorial video. Today I'd like to discuss modules. Now, modules in Astrox Imperium are the main way that you interact with the game. Now, there are some things you can do without any modules at all, such as transport missions and escort missions and fabrication missions and all that, market trading. All that can be done without anything, but any other profession, especially gather and combat, you will need active modules at least. Now, there are two different types of modules. If we head over to the market here, we have our active modules and our passive modules. And the difference between these two is that active modules actually do things. They shoot things, they mine things, they salvage things, all of that. Passive modules almost exclusively modify your ship stats. Cargo bays expand your cargo room, impact armor increases your resistance to impact, advanced max reduction reduces your ship's mass. Basically anything in this window here. As you can see, I currently have several advanced thrusters on my vessel, so my speed is going to be absolutely stupid. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you about some of the more fine details about modules. If you want to see how they're used, targeting, activation, and all of that, I highly suggest you use the basic combat tutorial and the initial introduction tutorial. Both of them cover these topics pretty well, and you can learn them at your own pace. I want to talk about some things that they don't quite cover. Now, before we go any further, I forgot to mention, Astrox Imperium is currently in early access. We've actually just updated to build 95. Mostly it was bug fixes. We also now have DPS for turrets, as you can see here in the yellow number. But it's still pretty rudimentary, and they're not very accurate. So, with that out of the way, here's what we currently have. I'm going to start with these non-combat modules here, because these are what most people will probably be using. Now, on the front of my ship, I have an active scanner, I have a utility salvager, generic default tractor, and an ore miner, one of the specialized ones. So let's start with miners. Actually, let's start with the university, because something important about modules is that you have to know how to actually use them. In this case, every kind of module has its own university skill tree, in a way. So if I go back to the show all here, in class, you'll see that I have my miner basic operation, and then back here we have all the combat operations. And in order to use an active module, you need at least one level in any given skill in order to use that module. Passive modules, on the other hand, you can use whenever. There's no skills for them, they just work. So let's undock here. Now, other than your basic operation skills, each module type also has its own skill tree, as I just mentioned. This affects just about everything stat-wise about that module. As you can see here, hovering over my mining module, we have cycle rate, turn rate, max range, velocity, energy, durability, strength, and its ammunition type. all of these things can be effective by university skills, except for the ammo type. I've just put myself over here in Starfort Ramos, go to the university here, and as you can see, all of these skills are minor related. Just below, we also have the Salvager Basic Operation, which was not available in Biomate University. And I believe there's also Tractor Training here somewhere. Yes, here we go. Tractor Basic Operations. So, once you've trained at least one level in Basic Operations, you'll unlock several other skills that you can train. Here we have Energy Optimization, something that is unique to energy-based weapons, such as mining modules, beam weapons, and laser weapons. Since they all use energy as ammunition, this is basically an ammo-saving measure, which allows you to mine or shoot for a lot longer period of time, and is honestly really nice to have. We also have the focal range, which is your firing range, but you'll notice we still have several locked ones, and that is because in order to unlock these, you need to find an advanced systems skill. Now, on top of unlocking these other skills, such as cycle mechanics, which is fire rate, harvest calibration, which for miners is their damage output, advanced systems gives a general bonus. And that just means it affects every other stat on this module type. Now, with the exception of energy optimization, which again is unique to energy-based weapons and modules, all of these things are rather universal. Each module type will have its own set of all of these, and they are completely separate and unique to each module type. So, now that we have skills and training out of the way, I would like to discuss a bit about how modules actually work, what they can do. Now, in the tutorials, they do cover your mining module, and in the second tutorial, the combat training, they cover laser modules. But they don't really go into depth about what exactly they can and can't do. So mining modules, which we'll start with, are rather straightforward. You can go find an asteroid of any kind, it doesn't matter what. You simply click to activate, and once you are within range, let's get this rock, it's a bit closer, it will begin mining that object. There we go. You can see it fires, it deals a little bit of damage. That damage is actually equivalent to how much rock you are mining. And that's an important distinction because each asteroid also has an actual health bar. The stronger the module that you have, for a mining module, the more ore you'll get, but also the more actual damage you'll deal to the rock itself. Once this HP is diminished, this rock will disappear. As you can see, it's kind of shrinking with every single shot, and will kind of just poof into non-existence by the time you're done. Now, it's important to note that mining modules are only good for mining. Even though they do have a strength stat, which is what the usual term is for damage output, and it does deal damage to asteroids, you cannot use it against other ships, stations, or buildings. For example, I'll select this person over here, lock target, and it is now targeting this person's ship. As you can see, when we get into range here, however, it will not fire even though it is activated. And that is because ships are not mineable. One other important thing to note is that asteroids are not the only things you can mine. If you want to be slightly cheeky, you'll notice that stars are actually scannable. And this is because they're also mineable. As you can see here, I've got the scan going. This will take quite some time because the star is very far away. However, if you do get out there, you can mine it, and it gives you a special, very specific resource. All stars do give the exact same resource known as electron orbs. You can also get those from little gas-like looking clouds, which will be called electron clouds, that you can find in certain sectors, hanging around just like regular asteroids do. And they work the exact same way. They have a certain amount of health, and your mining beam will deal a certain amount of damage, which correlates to how much resource it's actually extracting. I believe that's all I have to say about mining modules in particular. So moving on, we also have the active scanning module. Now these modules So what these do is they give you more information on whatever it is you're targeting. As you see here, I currently have this atomite ore targeted. However, I really don't know much about it. I have a health bar up here at the top. I have it here, the ore it gives me. But other than that, I don't really know anything about it. By activating my active scanner, it will start doing a scanning pulse. As long as it finishes while it's in range, I will receive a lot more data like we'll see here in a second. Just so you know, you can activate this at any time, and it will just continue to cycle until it actually hits something. So as you can see here, we just got this pop-up window, and we now have a lot of information on this ore. Going through it, we have a flavor splurge, just to explain what it is, the level of resource, what type it is, etc., etc. The grow rate and value. Grow rate is how fast your rocks will grow. Especially in sandbox mode, you can actually set how fast this is. Current value, max value. Over here in harvest is very important information. So what you can do with ores, once you've scanned and mined them, or even just mine them, you don't have to scan them. This is what it will give us per ore in the refinery. So 6 water, 3 carbon, and 5 hydrogen per atomite ore unit. And this isn't something you'd really be able to see without active scanning this particular rock, or any other atomite ore anywhere. Over here, you see the mission objective false, and that just means that this is just a regular random rock. If you're doing missions, in the missions tab of stations, they'll spawn special rocks that disappear and appear as you do missions. In that case, this will be mission objective true, and the rock will appear yellow in the active scanning mode, in the tactical mode, instead of this white piece you'll see here. And then we have our location coordinates. Now, active scanners can actually be used on just about everything. Over here, I can scan this public energy generator, and it will give me all the stats about that. We can also scan people's ships, and it will tell you what kind of ship they're flying, who they're with, who's flying it, what modules they have, and all of that. Here we go, we're about to finish scanning this. Again, a splurge explaining what this thing is and what it does. Over here, you can see this actually has a max HP, current HP, and it tells you what it does, as well as who it belongs to, because it is a structure. And if you scan a station, it's basically like you're docked in it, except you can't actually buy or manipulate anything. But you can peruse the university, all of the market, etc., as you go along. The active scanner modules are actually an entire mission type of their own if you choose to do that. You will be given missions to go out and scan people and structures and all of that, and then you can hand them in for money and skill points. So this is quite a useful thing. Those missions are very common, and they pay out surprisingly well. So having an active scanner module is very useful to have. So the miner and the active scanner are almost universally useful. You'll always have rocks to mine that you want to mine, and the active scanner can be used on literally everything, and if you want to do missions, scanning missions will pop up very often. The other two non-combat active modules we have here are the tractor beam and the utility salvager. The utility is just the level of it, it's just a salvaging module. So, both of these are kind of a bit extra. They really only have one specific purpose. For the tractor beam, that is moving things. Now, there's not really a whole lot of purpose to moving things in Astrox. Once you get a more powerful tractor beam, the more powerful it is, the bigger things it can move and the farther it can move them. It's not very terribly useful. As you can see here, I'm heading towards this adamite ore. If I can come to a complete stop. Here we go. So I am completely stopped right now. As you can see, every time I'm hitting this, I'm dragging it just a little bit closer. It's 263.8, in case you can't read those on YouTube. Now it's 263.5. As you can tell, this is very, very slow. But of course, this is also only a level 1 tractor beam, and a moderate-sized piece of adamite ore. The only real reason to do this is if you have an enormous rock like this one right here, you could drag it until it's right next to a station and just generally shorten your mining trips. And if you want to be particularly efficient, you can also mine it while you're moving it. The only other reason to really have it is to pull around structures. Structures are something you can find everywhere. I just scanned a generator a moment ago, but you can also build your own in the very late game. So if you're not happy with exactly where your structure ended up, or if you messed up its placement in general, you can get a higher level tractor beam and scoot it out of the way to where you want it to be. Other than that, it doesn't have any use in missions, it can't mine anything, it doesn't hurt anything. It says here it has a bit of DPS, but it doesn't actually do any damage. As you can see in our top right corner here, this rock, despite being hit multiple times, still has 90.1 health out of 90.1 health. And that's about all there is to tractor beams. Kind of amusing to use at times, but not terribly useful. And the final non-combat module we have is the Salvager. Now, salvagers actually work very similar to mining beams. It's simply the thing they work on that is different, and in this case, that is scraps, derelicts, fragments, and junk. All of these things can be found usually by destroying a ship, most commonly a raider, or a NPC if you so choose, these little white guys floating around. If I were to completely destroy their ship, they'd drop a crate and several pieces of salvage. You can also find salvage by destroying structures, although this is not recommended, nor is killing NPCs, because this can hurt your faction rating. And that brings its own levels of issues. Killing raiders, however, despite bringing in rather low quality scrap and junk, doesn't make anybody mad, and actually people kind of like you for it. In special occasions, in certain sectors, over here in the yellow region, which is the I forgot the name. The extractors region, we'll just call it for now. Way over here, there's actually a special sector where instead of asteroids, it has tons of scrap and derelicts floating around. And if you really want to use salvagers, that is the place to be. Now what salvage does for you is it kind of acts like an asteroid. You mine it, and then you can go put it in a refinery, and it will give you components. The difference being, instead of basic things like hydrogen, water, and carbon, they'll give you things like computer circuits, motherboards, and other more advanced components. Each level of scrap, junk, fragment, and derelict, gives its own type of resource, just like different types of asteroid give their own types of resource. And you can either then sell that, or use it to build your own stuff if you choose to be a fabricator. It pairs very well with combat modules, simply because they'll be going around killing things anyway, and as you kill them, they'll blow up into a bunch of scrap, and then you mine that for just a bit of extra profit. Quick and simple, makes a bit of money. I believe there's actually an expansion plan for these to make them diversify just a bit more from miners. I'm not exactly sure what that plan is, but it is being thought about by the dev of the game. So that's about all there is to the non-combat modules. They're very simple, they all have a very specific purpose, and some of them are unique to their own profession, or just a general useful thing to have. I will note there is one that I did not cover, and that is the Spotlight module. It can be found in Biomate University, and it is even more useless than the Tractor Beam, to be quite honest. It's kind of a leftover from when the game was just a bit darker. I mean, things are a bit shadowy here, but apparently the lighting used to be much, much darker, and people wanted some light, so we put in a Spotlight module. You can have it if you want for looks, but it doesn't really do anything. A final note before I dock here is this stuff right here. As you can see, there's this kind of blown up station looking thing. And just to be clear, you can't click on any of this, although it does look like something you might be able to use the salvager on, being a bunch of scraps and parts laying around. This is actually a system decoration. It's got no physical properties, you can fly right through it currently. I believe Momoguru, the dev, is going to add hitboxes to it later on, but currently it's just there for story purposes. You'll also notice this giant structure in the background, and it's the same story with that. This is purely decorative. It can't be mined, it can't be touched, it can't be hurt in any way. Even though it does look very similar to what scrap and derelicts might look like. So I'm going to dock in here. And we'll go to the garage, and I'm just going to offload all of these. Go sell that adamite ore I mined a moment ago. And we'll switch out for our combat modules. I'm not going to have enough slots to cover all these. That. Excellent. And we'll come back for the torpedo launcher in a moment. So I've just picked up a generic light beam, which is a beam weapon, not to be confused with mining beams. Mining beams are purely utility, as I just mentioned. They can't deal damage to ships or structures. Combat beams, as I'll call them here, are the opposite. They cannot mine things, they cannot salvage things, They do look very similar when firing to the mining beam, but they can't target rocks or anything like that. They are purely for dealing damage to either structures or ships. Next after that, we have the missile launcher, in this case a level 1 generic single launcher. After that, the generic light laser, which is a laser type weapon. This is the first weapon you'll likely have in the game, especially if you go through the combat tutorial. This is what they have you use. And then beside that, we have the single 20mm gun. Now, all of these weapons come in a number of varieties. For instance, the generic light beam could also be a generic medium or a generic heavy beam. And that just denotes how powerful it is and how much energy it uses, and will affect its general stats. The same also goes for the non-combat modules, such as the miners. If you noticed, I had a special miner, so it didn't quite have this naming convention, but they do all follow this general naming pattern, where small and light are the weakest. They use the less energy, but they deal less damage as well, and tend to cycle a little bit faster. The mediums, or the generic, tend to be about around the middle. They use a bit more energy, deal a bit more damage, and tend to fire a little bit slower. They also tend to have just a little bit more range and some more durability. And then there's the large and the heavy ones. I might be able to show some of this here instead of just using words. Yes, here we go, a generic light miner. And then a little farther down, we should have a generic small miner, which is just one step up. And then the special miner, which has its own unique stats. It should be noted that when they have a special name like this, their stats are altered a lot more than just the small, light, medium, etc., etc. Usually they have one or two stats that are much better than other things at their particular level, whether it be the cycle rate, or range, or how much strength it has. However, they can also be slightly worse than the generic variants, so do keep an eye on these stats. Don't just assume that because it has a special name that it's actually better. Go back to the garage here. And yes, their title also doesn't denote their level. The generic light beam is a level 1, but it can go higher. For instance, there will be light lasers. I believe they're called Vita lights, and they're levels 6 and 8, I believe, which is higher than the heavy and large lasers that you'll find before then. That just reflects their stats, not their actual level. And then the last module here, if you're getting off that tangent, is the generic single 20mm gun. These follow a kind of similar thing to missile launchers, in that their specialty, instead of sizes, are actually how many rounds they fire and how they fire them. If we go back to the market here, and active modules, you'll see that there's also a generic dual 20mm gun, which means it fires 2 rounds. And then somewhere down here is a Gatling gun, which fires 6 rounds in quick succession and then does a longer reload. I don't see it right now. A thing you might want to look out for when using cannons is that there's actually 2 different types. You see here we have a 20mm cannon and a 60mm cannon. These both fall under the projectile basic operation skill, and both are upgraded by the same skill tree. all the projectile level skills. The difference being the amount of damage they do, how far they shoot. 20mm in general are weaker but fire faster, and these 60mm are heavier but fire slower. While we're on the topic of those, you should also watch your ammunition. 20mm only fire 20mm, 60mm only fire 60mm rounds. Try not to get these confused, they can't shoot the other round, and if you buy one, you might accidentally waste your money if it's not your actual type of gun. So, with all of that out of the way, I'm gonna do something very stupid and use NPCs and stations as target practice to show you just how these modules work. In general, this is highly inadvisable. While shooting at things and hurting them doesn't do too much bad, they will fight back if they have weapons. Additionally, you can summon the cops, as I'm sure we'll see here, and they'll come and put a stop to your little deviancy. Now, normally, you can't target neutral or friendly things. As you can see here, all my modules are fully charged up, and I'm well within range of Biomate University, but I'm not shooting at it. And that is because your guns come with a safety feature. As you can see down here, we have 6 little buttons. I'll go down the list here. First is not actually weapon related, it is the open and close panels button. This is actually very useful, just bringing everything out and putting everything in. Next 4 buttons are combat related. We have the all modules lock target button. So as you can see, I'm targeting Biomate University, but if I went and targeted Adamite Ore over here, you'll notice that I'm still targeting Biomate University. In order to get these to change, I'd have to click and retarget them by cycling them off and then on again. Or you can click the target lock module and it will simply put all of your modules on that new target. There we go, I'm now targeting Proctor Center instead of that asteroid. You may have also noticed that there's this little pop-up list here, and that allows you to target multiple things at once. Obviously, as my safety is on, I won't actually shoot anything. None of these can mine rocks or shoot stations right now. This next button is what I was actually talking about, and that is the toggle friendly fire. By default, this will always be off, which means you can't shoot anything that isn't a raider or an enemy structure or someone who's already shot you. When you turn this on, your modules will start actually shooting at whatever you currently have targeted. And I advise you be very, very careful about this. As I said, anything with weapons will shoot back at you, and regardless of what you shoot at, the cops will probably come to stop you. And then you have to either deal with them or run away very, very quickly. What level are you? You're a cruiser. I'm not going to mess with that because I don't feel like dying. You can die in this game if you run out of shields and hit points. Depending on what kind of difficulty you have, you can have different results. I believe there is a permadeath option if you choose a higher difficulty, but in the campaign, and I believe by default, you can simply restart from your last save, which is usually whenever you last entered or exited a station. Otherwise, you can start over, you'll have all your skills and stuff, but you'll start with an old ship, and basically start from the beginning again, just with your levels and skills still intact. So, to help demonstrate these weapons, I'm going to attack Biomate University. Oh yes, and these last 2 are simply powering up all modules and powering down all modules. Very useful when you start getting a lot, or just don't care about what you have on. So the first one we'll cover is the generic light beam. Now this is a beam type weapon, which means that it takes energy for ammo. As you can see here, this ship has a decent amount of energy pool and a decent amount of regen. Not the greatest, but not terrible. I'm also flying a BF-1 Enforcer, which is a slight upgrade, over the escort that you initially start with, so keep that in mind. And the reason that's important is because energy weapons are, as you might have guessed, very energy intensive. If you have a build, which is all of your active slots completely filled with energy weapons, your energy is going to be very important to monitor. As you use energy up, you'll be fine until it reaches the very bottom. At that point, your modules will no longer fire until they have sufficient amounts of energy, but you also can't use your afterburner to run away from things. And if you're at complete zero energy, you can't move at all. Of course, staying at absolute zero is very hard to do, simply because your ship is always recharging. Simply letting go of the afterburner and turning off your modules will get you back in motion in no time. So we're going to fire this up, targeting Biomate University, and turning friendly fire on. As you can see here, that allowed me to shoot at Biomate. I don't seem to have dealt any damage though. That's odd. We'll try a different target then. How about one of these structures? They won't fight back and absolutely murder me, unlike that cruiser over there. So beam weapons are very similar to laser weapons. Both use energy, but they act very differently. As you saw, the beam weapon fires one long straight beam that actually travels fairly slowly. Let's see here. Lock target. Can I damage this? There we go. So as a level 1 module, beams do a lot of damage. As you can see here, I'm getting 20s and 19s. In general, they're better against slower moving targets though. They have relatively poor tracking, they turn slowly, and because they have such a low velocity, they take a while to actually reach their target. If you're fighting a small zippy raider, or even just a smaller NPC, they can usually fairly easily dodge this. Not guaranteed, but if they're zipping around you in big old circles, it has a very hard time actually making a connection. I'm going to stop shooting at this before the cops come out. They should be here soon. I don't know, we'll see how much time we have. And yes, the beam weapon is basically a heavier laser. It does a lot more damage, it hits harder in general, but it's slower, doesn't track quite as well, and is generally better to use either against structures or bigger ships. It also takes notably more energy, but it about evens out because of its slower fire rate with how much energy the lasers take. Speaking of lasers, we'll move over to these. Now again, this is the first weapon you'll ever get in the game. You actually start with one in your ship. And they are much faster firing. They also use energy. But as you can see here, I'm doing only half the damage that the beam is doing. Now lasers, despite being the first weapon you get, are actually fairly decent. They're very jack of all trades. They have an okay range, they fire relatively quickly, do an okay amount of damage, and have great tracking. They're fairly good at hitting smaller or medium targets. They do struggle with that damage, however. You're either going to need a lot of lasers, or mix them in with some other weapons if you really plan on making a combat build. It should also be noted that they go through energy very quickly. I don't really have enough modules here to show you, but I do have a ship that has a full loadout of laser modules, and it absolutely eats through its energy reserves. This can be negated with the unique energy optimization that each weapon has, which vastly reduces the amount of energy it uses. It will also help if you use the energy ship systems and the ship energy recharge systems, which are actually for your ship, not the weapons, but that gives you a better stockpile of energy and a better recharge rate. What can also help with this is the advanced energy generators, which can go in your passive module slots, and that very greatly increases your recharge rate. Just a couple of those will usually let you keep up with any loadout of energy-based weapons, be they mining beams, or lasers. So both of those are pretty all-around weapons, the beam being a bit heavier than the laser, but they're both fairly good even as a basic module. As far as upgrading them in the skills goes, they can get quite devastating. I personally actually really love the lasers. They fire very quickly. When upgraded, they take very little energy. And they look really cool, not gonna lie. So, moving on from our energy-based weapons, we also have projectile-based weapons. And the biggest difference between these is that projectile-based weapons use ammunition. They need actual physical ammo in order to fire, unlike your energy weapons, which simply use your ship's energy reserves. Now this does have its trade-offs. Generally speaking, projectile weapons are stronger than energy weapons. Also to note is that most ships don't have explosive or impact armor. Some do, but energy-based resistances are much more common. And this exacerbates the damage difference. Beams and lasers almost always meet some kind of resistance. Missiles and bullets, however, can usually go straight to their damage, and not everything has resistance to them. Also should be noted that ammo takes space. So depending on how combat oriented you want to be and how much you want to loot, or if you want to do transport or cargo missions on the side, you will have to use some of your cargo bay in order to carry it. Now we'll start with the generic single 20mm gun. As I said before, this works exactly the same as the 60mm gun, it's just a lighter variant, similar to the difference between lasers and beams. Now in order to fire these weapons, you first have to have some ammo in your storage, your cargo bay, and you also have to make sure it's actually loaded. Now it was changed recently so that ammo is loaded by default, but by clicking this little spot underneath the picture, you can see that we have different ammo types available to us, because I am carrying multiple types of ammo in my cargo bay. You can also just unload the weapon entirely if you don't want it firing, and this was also the default state before some recent patches. So for now, we'll use our basic 20mm ammo, and here we go. As you can see, using the most basic ammo type and the lowest level gun, it doesn't do a whole lot of damage. However, it does fire relatively quickly, about on par with the lasers. Here we go, we'll change ammunition type to the explosive 20mm. And while it might look like it's doing the same amount of damage, that's because this structure probably doesn't have any armor. Something to note about the damage types is that they do different things. Other than just having resistances, they can also deal different types of damage. Energy weapons are good against shields, kinetic weapons are good against armor, and explosives actually can damage modules, even through shields and armor. And that's something that's very unique about missile launchers, but can also be achieved to a lesser extent with projectile guns. Overall, guns are kind of on par with lasers. Depending on what type of ammunition you use, they can be a little bit better, but they're really just something a bit different to use. I would consider these ones pretty average, right alongside the lasers. It's a good alternative if you want to use more projectile weapons, maybe deal a little bit more damage to most types of ships and units, as most of them don't have kinetic armor. But it's still not really a top tier weapon. The 60mm does fare slightly better, but again, a lower fire rate, more damage, slightly longer range most likely, etc, etc. And then we have missiles. Missiles are actually fairly unique. As you go up through the levels, the launcher itself will get slightly better, but really the biggest difference is how many missiles it actually fires. It can go anywhere from 1 to 6, and the more missiles you fire, the longer the reload is, but you're literally multiplying your damage per shot. Missiles, launchers obviously take missile-type ammunition, and just like projectile weapons, there's different types. Basic, kinetic, explosive, etc, etc. The big difference about missiles is they're not really direct fire weapons. Everything else we've gone through so far simply shoots directly at a target as long as it's within its firing arc. Typically, these weapons either hit or they miss. They all travel fast enough, with the exception of the beam weapons, to hit whatever flies in front of them, as long as it's not moving in super crazy ways. They do have varying levels of accuracy, but there's not really any kind of crazy maneuvers you can do or how fast you can travel to dodge them, unless you manage to actually fly faster than the projectile itself, which is very much possible if you have upgraded skills, a bunch of thruster passive modules, etc, etc. You can go ridiculously fast and probably outrun just about anything. But this is actually a problem that missiles suffer. As you can see here, we have all of our stats, but none of these affect the missiles themselves, only the launcher. What I mean by this is that missiles have their own stats, not just damage, but also flight performance. Now on the one hand, missiles are extremely powerful. They do lots of damage, and they actually track their target. These ones are pretty weak, again, with a low-level launcher. But if you're trying to hit something generally small but very swift, these will usually fare a lot better than most other weapons, simply because they can track after they're launched. Can't really demonstrate that well against this, but I'm kind of reluctant to attack a ship because I don't want to die right now. Frigates are pretty midline ships, but they're not really suited for combat with the equivalent or larger ships just yet. I also haven't trained up any of my armor skills or anything like that, so it's probably a pretty bad idea to go combating. So, as I was saying, missiles have their own performance. They do track, they do turn, they can do all kinds of crazy things, but they can also be dodged almost guaranteed, which is a bit different than any other weapons. Again, they're all kind of either they hit or they miss. In order to change that, you have to do something rather extreme, like travel faster than bullets, which is not a very easy thing to do. They have a velocity of 500 meters per second. And even with a highly upgraded ship, that is extremely fast. Beams are a bit easier, they only travel at 500 meters a second, which actually looking at it is about the same, but they can travel slower depending on what type of beam you have. Missiles, on the other hand, also travel at 500, but they can also turn. So what happens is you get a raider that's flying around you in circles really quickly, and they can sometimes outrun the missiles. They're simply moving too fast and turning too tight, and they can outperform it. Now, I'm not sure if this will always work this way. It has worked this way so far, but these modules have actually had their stats changed and updated since the last time I've looked at most of them. missiles were much, much slower. They were fast enough to catch most things, but with the zippiest of raiders, or if you were especially fast, missiles were being fired at you, you could generally outrun them, or if you turned slightly, outmaneuver them. So that's something to think about. The other thing is that they deal mostly explosive damage, regardless of what type of missile you're using, basic, kinetic, or explosive. Now, when shooting at other things, that doesn't matter a whole lot. However, when they're being fired at you, it does matter, because you actually care about your module's durability. As you can see here, the durability is placed right underneath the pictures themselves, and each point of durability is equivalent to 1 firing cycle. This works the same for all types of modules, miners, tractor beams, combat modules, all of it. What missiles and explosive damage will do is it will actually take a chunk off of your durability. This can be a problem if you're taking a lot of missiles, or if you're in the middle of combat. Not only will be using up your own durability by using your own modules, but enemies can be dealing damage directly to them. Now, with tougher modules like this gun here, with 2500 durability, it's going to take a long time to take this out, and you're more likely to die before that actually happens. However, if you've been out in space for a relatively long period of time and haven't repaired your modules lately, they're all low on durability, and you get yourself in the middle of a fight, you might actually end up breaking them. Now, modules don't actually get destroyed, they just become non-functional. Of course, if you're in the middle of a big fight, that can be a huge issue. You can't shoot back, you probably lose some of your firing arcs, especially on a smaller ship like this. As you can see, I only have 2 side weapons and 2 top weapons. If one of these goes out, I lose a large part of my firepower and my firing arcs. To fix them, it's quite simple. You run off to a station and you repair your modules as you should be doing regularly. The final module we have to look at here, as far as active modules goes, is the torpedo launcher. Now, because this is an early access build and the campaign is still a very test groundish sandbox, torpedoes have just been added to Biomate University, as a matter of fact. Typically, these are going to be extremely rare. Torpedoes deal a ton of damage. They're very slow. They have, I believe, a low amount of tracking. We'll test that in a moment. But they're not very good for regular combat. What they're really meant for is taking out either the biggest of ships, dreadnoughts and stuff, battle cruisers, the 2 largest classes, but they really specialize at taking out structures. And that's kind of why they're rare. It's kind of a lore reason. We're all in space. Our stations, our structures, our farms are all in space. Typically, you don't want those going around getting blown up. So unless you're hunting down raider hideouts or something like that, these won't be very useful to you unless you're being very, very evil. Let's load this up, and I'll just put everything else away for now for the sake of clutter. Torpedoes are also very expensive and very rare. The fact that they're in Biomate University now, again, is just purely for testing purposes. Look at the size of that thing. Alright, and let's go back to beating up on this poor little... Oh boy, it was a hospital. Oh jeez. It's fine, I'm sure no one's in there. I'll touch our afterburners here. Turn our friendly fire on. And here we go. Now, as you can see, this has a large amount of range. We started firing from quite far out. And they are doing a ton of damage for a level 1 module and basic ammunition. There we go, there's one trying to track its target. As you can see, it turns. It does turn, but not very well at all. It's very slow. It can hit large ships, but it's going to have a very difficult time hitting anything smaller. You're much better off using a more traditional laser or projectile module. So yes, they're very powerful, but they're only good against the largest things, and you probably won't use these very much unless you're specifically hunting structures to be evil, or pirate hideouts to root them out and get their loot. And I believe that is all the active modules at this time. I'm not entirely certain if there will be more added, or if all the ones I've currently showed you will stay. Yep, there's the police. So as you can see, the police have just showed up, and this is why I recommend against shooting at buildings. Generally, police are friendly. They'll go after raiders that pop up into a system. They'll assist you if a hostile NPC starts attacking you. But if you go and start making trouble, they will come after you. And they will try and murder you. And you can either run away, or you can try and fight back. Although if you do fight back, you're going to have to completely destroy them. And everyone's going to hate you for that. Now, maybe you don't care about that and you just want their stuff, but it's generally a bad idea unless you plan on being evil. Alright. So that was all of our active modules, from the rare to the common. Generally speaking, as far as combat modules go, you can use whatever you like. They're all viable weapons, except perhaps this torpedo launcher. You're not going to hit much with this. But lasers, beams, guns, missiles, they all work. They're all good, depending on the exact situation. Some are better than others. Missiles are good at tracking down swifter targets, as long as they're not too swift, and able to dodge the missiles. And then guns and energy weapons are kind of middling. They do decent damage, they fire faster, they have good tracking. You know, it all works. It's entirely up to you what you actually want to use. And then, of course, our utility modules, our non-combat modules, are all job-based. You can carry all of them, you can carry all of one of them, you can carry none of them. It's all up to you and how you want to play. So the last thing we're going to look at here is the passive modules. Over here. So passive modules, I believe I mentioned this at the very beginning, affects certain aspects of your ship. Each ship has a certain number of active module slots and passive module slots. You can see their symbols here. I have a bunch of advanced thrusters on because I didn't want this video to take forever just flying around. And passive modules are different from active modules not only in that, but in that they affect one thing only. Active modules have all their own stats, they do their own thing, they're all a little bit different, but they're pretty general purpose. Passive modules are extremely specific on the other hand, and they're always active. As you can see here, an advanced thruster is a class 3, or a level 3, same thing. And what this does is it increases my max thrust by 30%. That directly correlates to my ship's stats. Over here, you can see my thrust, 779 point a lot of decimals. And thrust works against mass to give you your actual flying speed. I'm not sure what the exact formula is here, but the more thrust you have and the less mass you have, the faster you go and the cooler you are. And there is a passive module, I believe, for every single aspect of your ship. We go over here. There's ones for your thrust, the thruster. There's engine cores, which reduce your engine burn. Currently, those are completely useless because your ship doesn't actually burn fuel, because there is no fuel. That's still a holdover from the first Astrox game. There's mass reductions for your mass, turn thrusters, drone command bays. I don't know what these ones are called for your shield recharge, but this is very slow. You usually don't want to mess with this just because it is so low. I'm not sure if that's on purpose or just for testing. I'm sure some ships will have much higher shield recharge rates later on. Your energy recharge rate is usually a good thing to get up for any ship, and those are used by generators. Let's see, do we have any here at Biomate? Yes, we do, right here. And so on and so forth. Now, another difference between passives and actives is the level system. Passive modules work a lot more like life support goods than they do actual active modules. They have a very linear leveling system. Level 1, 10%, level 1, 5%, level 2, 20%. They all work exactly the same at each level. Some things like the basic max reduction will have a slightly different number because mass actually controls two things, both your thrust and your turn rate. But generally speaking, they're very linear. And the progression goes a basic, which is level 1, to an improved, which is level 2, to an advanced, which is level 3, premium, level 4, and the top level is a prototype, which is level 5. Generally speaking, you always want the prototype stuff. It's the best you can get, and it makes your ship all around much more efficient than carrying around a bunch of low-level modules. And unlike active modules, there's absolutely no cost to using any of these. Active modules, if you use one that's very high level on a not so high level ship, you're probably just going to run through your energy really, really quickly, and they're going to become more or less useless. Can't really use a module if you don't have enough energy to fire it. Passive modules, on the other hand, have absolutely no upkeep whatsoever. Even things like the improved energy capacitor don't actually use energy, they just increase your energy capacity. And yeah, use these to build up what you like. Personally, I would recommend energy generators all the way, as well as cargo expansions. Both of those are useful in just about every profession in any way you want to play. The second runners-up would definitely be basic mass reduction. This increases both your speed and your turn rate. Speed is obviously useful for everyone. Turn rate is mostly useful for combat, trying to keep up with raiders that fly around you in circles. It helps keep your modules on, have the raiders in your firing arcs longer, which is very helpful. And then, of course, what I'm using currently, the advanced thrusters, which just straight up increase your speed. Generally speaking, they do increase your speed more than the mass reduction, but putting them in combination is a real winner. Other things are kind of secondary, but if you are being annoyed because you can't hold enough targets, for instance, the advanced targeting system increases your max targets. Very useful if you're just searching out a system or whatnot. Now, the last thing to talk about here, in case of modules, is something I actually don't have that I can show you right now, and that is rare modules. Now, rare modules isn't like the torpedo launcher. That one's hard to find, but you can find it just sitting in any old market. It just doesn't show up very often. What I'm talking about are special modules that have modifiers added to them. And they can't usually be found in markets. You usually have to go out and kill a bunch of raiders or NPCs in order to find them. On very, very rare occasions, you can find one in a market. The one I found, for instance, was an ECM module, which is actually something I forgot to talk about. I'll cover that in a moment. And they come in 3 types. The lowest level is rare. The second level is Epic, and the last level is Artifact. And what these do is they add bonus modifiers to the module's stats at random. For example, a rare, let's say a rare torpedo launcher, like the one we have here, will boost 2 attributes, as it calls them, or stats, as most of normal people would call it, by 10%. And that acts exactly like improving a skill in that particular module's tree would. It simply gives it a straight up stat boost. Now, the allocation of these stats is random. If you find 2 different rare modules of the same type, they will likely have 2 completely different boosted stats, although both will be by 10%. The epic modules of any kind will boost up to 4 stats by 30%. Obviously, this is much better. And the final level, an artifact type module, is about the best you can get. It will boost 6 stats by 50%. Now, speaking on a chances note, these are very, very rare. I have probably almost 100 hours in this game, and I've only really found rare modules. I believe I saw one epic at one time, but it was an ECM module, and I don't really use those. They don't deal much damage, so I kind of passed on it. Now, the way to think about those is they kind of act as a +1, +2, or +3 to whatever level your module currently is. The modifiers, the rare, epic, and artifact modifiers, can be applied to any level of module, not just top modules. So something to consider is, for instance, if I found an artifact generic torpedo launcher, it would be pretty insanely good for the level it is. However, it probably will still be surpassed by, say, a level 6 torpedo launcher. The stat bonuses are good, but generally speaking, if you can find a module several levels higher than that, you should go with that module instead. If you want a firm answer, just check the stats for yourself, see if you like what it does. If the stats are higher, it will vary. So technically speaking, the best module you'll ever find in this instance would be a level 10 torpedo launcher with the artifact modifiers on it, which would be 6 of its stats, which in this case is, I believe, all of them, all improved by 50%, which is pretty crazy. Something to note here, though, is that both active and passive modules can get this rare modifier. And to be quite honest, it's a lot better on active modules than it is on passive modules. And that's simply because of their level scaling. Active modules scale a lot more incrementally than passive modules do. They have multiple stats to affect, and it's generally just smaller leaps between levels. So what this does, it allows all the modifiers to take place. The amount of stats that it will modify don't stack. So what that means is, unfortunately, when it hits a passive module, it will only boost this stat once. No matter what rarity it is, a rare, an epic, or an artifact, it only has one stat to boost, so it can only have that stat boost once. It won't boost it 2 or 4 or 6 times. So generally speaking, the rarer passive modules aren't really that great unless you already have it a top tier module and that gets the rarity modifier. Generally speaking, the next level up of a passive module will be more powerful than either a rare or an epic modifier. An artifact might be able to match the next level, but the next level beyond that will probably surpass it. If you can find one that is on a prototype passive module, the highest level, however, absolutely take that. that is going to be better than any passive module you'll be able to find any other way. It's already level 5, and as I said, the modifier kind of acts like a +1, 2, or 3 to that level. So, as I just reminded myself a moment ago, there's also ECM modules. And these kind of fall between utility and weapon. You'll actually notice pirates and law enforcement using these, mostly, is where you'll first encounter them. Law enforcement likes to use an ECM module, which is an electronic countermeasure, just in case you were wondering, and they like to use it to stop you. What it will do is they'll get really close, and it will literally just shut off your engines. It's like you just hit the brakes, you'll come to a complete stop, and you'll be stuck in space. This can be very problemsome, especially if you were trying to run from the police instead of attacking them. If there's 2 cops around, they'll have you completely stuck, and you really won't have a choice except to fight. Now, you will still be able to turn slightly, as this doesn't use your actual thrust, it's a different stat. So you can still get your weapons in a firing arc in order to deal with the issue. But obviously, killing the police is not a great idea. You'll lose a lot of faction rating, and you'll get in even more trouble. The raiders, on the other hand, like to use sensor scrambling. And what that will do, let's undock here for a second, is all of these targets I have here, all of my active targets, will just be deleted. So you'll be fighting raiders, you'll be shooting at someone, and then suddenly you'll just stop shooting. All of these passive scans, your buildings, your structures, and your gates, all of these will be fine, they'll still be here. It's just things that you have actively targeted that will be disappeared. And in most cases, this will involve the guy you're shooting at and probably a couple of other raiders. In this case, all you have to do is simply go back and select your target and lock your target to start attacking again. You can do this as soon as your targets are cleared. Unlike the police and their engine stoppers, that lasts a moment. It takes a second for it to wear off, which kind of gives them time to fire it again, and is what makes you get stuck. Sensor scanner, on the other hand, you can just immediately reselect your target. So I stopped here in Star Gypsy Warehouse because, for testing purposes, these are the guys who have all the ECM modules. As you can see, they have their own specific tech tree, and there's also the cloak modules. I kind of lump these in with ECMs, again, because they're almost purely utility. In this case, the cloak field makes your ship invisible, unless you fire out of the cloak, in which case you become visible. These take a lot of power to run, and are generally inadvisable for low-level ships or unupgraded ships. But if you're in a spot of trouble, simply activate these as soon as you can get a little out of combat, and you can go on your merry way. No one will be able to see you. ECM modules, as you can see here, also have their own tree, including resistance, which is a bit unique. Typically, when you're upgrading your resistance to things, aka your armor resistance, these are all separate stats. You can find the upgrade or the skills for these over in the Proctor Center, which is the law station in Void Starcross. I believe you also have to... Nope, never mind. So we'll go into the market here, active modules, and here we go. So here's our cloak field generator. It does count as an active module, it takes a slot. So, the magweb is the police one. It puts a stop to your engines, you can't move. The module disruptor, as you can see in the description, stops a specific module. Higher levels probably stop it for longer or stop more modules, which renders you rather defenseless. Sensors Jammer. Not really certain what use this would have on most NPCs. I suppose it would stop them from targeting you, but the Target Scrambler does rather the same thing. This is what the pirates and raiders will be using on you, and it is rather annoying, especially when several of them are using it on you at the same time. However, if you're using it on someone, it will prevent them from firing at you for a moment, and can be rather useful if you have a couple of them, firing staggeredly. NPCs will retarget, including raiders, but it will take them a second to do so. This basically just gives you a small window of opportunity to not take damage, or to run away, or try and get past them, whatever it is you're trying to do. Now it does say that this has DPS, but I don't believe it does any actual damage. These are all purely electronic countermeasure type things. They're here to mess with the enemy's ship, disable something, stop them, generally mess around with them. It complements your other combat modules, but by and of itself, you're not going to get very far with these. I would generally consider these a rather advanced module, simply because of that. They don't really have their own use independently except as a distraction, which probably won't get you very far unless you're in a very tight spot. Alright, and I believe that about sums up all of the modules that are currently available in Astrox Imperium. All of these things are subject to change. Momoguru, the dev of the game, is constantly rebalancing things. As I mentioned, the new DPS stat is entirely new and very prototyped, not very accurate at this moment. So all of this is probably going to change once or twice more before the game's finished. However, for the time being, this is how things work, how good they are, and what they're useful for. So with all that, I hope this video has been helpful to you in some way, shape, or form, and I hope you all have a very nice day. Goodbye.